In the penultimate episode of Latter-day Left, Anarchy and Alan are joined by Anarchy's husband, Eric Garcia, and our producer, me, Marlo Belmano. We discuss breaking up Facebook or Amazon, our warmongering administration, social patterns in the Book of Mormon, and child heroes. Be sure to join us for our last family barbecue on June 18th. To find out more, go to our Facebook page or email us at latterdayleft@gmail.com. Now on to the show.
Hi, welcome to Latter-day Left. I am Anarchy.
And I'm Alan.
And we have a couple of extra faces, smiling faces here today.
And not Chris. Chris is out traveling.
He is.
And so Chris has been replaced with...
Eric.
How's
everyone doing today?
And me, apparently. The producer, Marlo.
Marlo is the producer. Yeah. She has a name.
Yeah, I know. I have a name.
The producer has a name?
Yeah. She does.
The Uber producer. Marlo.
She does introduce herself at the beginning of the episodes. I'm Marlo, the producer.
I do.
So if you've been wondering, that's who she is. And Eric is my plus one today. He's my husband. He's great.
Well, I thought this was a date. +1, right?
Yeah. Sorry,
okay.
we're going cheap tonight.
Wow.
We're saving money.
Wow, our show is cheap.
We're going to have maybe a slice of Costco pizza later if we're feeling fancy.
Costco pizza is fancy, man. That's good pizza.
Yeah, that's a good date.
Yeah, that is.
Oh, come on, you guys. The kids are still young.
That's true.
Yes. So,
yeah.
No, we're going to have a conversation since Chris is out of town. The cat's away, so we're going to play.
The mice will play.
Yes.
Oh, I hate mice.
Let's talk about the stuff. And, there's plenty of stuff going on to talk about, but one of the kind of sadder notes, of course, this week was another school shooting that happened, and the dialogue has interestingly shifted in this last one in Colorado and the one before in Florida. Both times there was a child, who is, being lauded in the press as a hero. And in both cases, they were shot fatally because they went and tried to challenge the gunmen and tackle them.
Because they tried to stop. I mean, yeah. I'm obviously more than impressed by the courage of that individual. I mean, what do we say? There's no love like the one who lays down his life
for his friends.
I mean, this is what these boys did. Mm-hmm. It is both admirable that they personally did that and an absolute travesty that they had to do that, and that in America what we're talking about now is the heroism of 12-year-olds rather than the rational approach. And
not that we're taking that bravery away. Not that we're trying to say that.
Not in any way.
But we want to really clearly say
they're still victims.
This is a child and a victim of a horrific crime.
This is not a soldier who lays down.
This is
not a soldier. This is a 12-year-old child
who should not have had to be in that.
And that's where I'm just like, where was I when I was 12 years old? For real, where was I?
Right.
I wasn't trying to think about.
I had fantasies of being a hero, but I never was.
And I think everybody really, especially with superheroes all over the place. I see it. These kids are going through drills. Even here where we are, they're going through drills. They are taught to think about these things, what is going to happen. And, we know now there are kids who write in their journals, they have wills at the young, tender age of 6. Who are they leaving their toys to?
That is so sad.
Because they're so worried about that. Even before all of this, there was, Beto, is that how you say his name? Beto O'Rourke?
Beto.
Yeah, how you say his name?
Depends who you are, if you say it like that or not.
But at one of his hometown hall things, some middle school kids asked him what he's going to do. What did you think about writing to a president when you were a kid? I would just be like, how is your dog? How is your dog? What's your favorite thing to eat? Bush, he didn't like broccoli, so But
it was also a different time.
Yeah.
But I think that, again, I made the comment during the week that where are the leaders? Why are they not speaking out? And somebody had the audacity to say, they're all speaking out. Really? Because nobody hears them. We can certainly hear them when they want to be heard, but they're just simply not there. The moral bankruptcy of anybody who supports the kind of violence that we have in our society, the availability of gun and the acceptance of violence.
Well, and here's why it happens, though. Nobody thinks, I'm not going to talk about politicians because they're purposely avoiding saying things and they've got reasons for being, spinning it or whatever they're doing. But the average person on either side of the issue thinks that they're standing up for, the right side of it. And I was talking to a family member this week who was saying, what is it in our society? Like, what's causing this? What is it? And I knew what she was getting at is that she wanted to find out if it was the video games we play or if it was
it wasn't that.
And that's the thing. It's like, people are thinking, they're like, yeah, I know that it has to be something about, evil about our generation. And the fact is, like, then why is it a problem here and not anywhere else in the world? It obviously is, there are things that go on in the rest of the world, but not to the level.
Honestly, I think it's just the prevalence of guns.
Obviously. that's the only difference.
People, when I was growing up, this is going to date me, how old I am, but we had Depeche Mode and The Cure. I mean, the most depressive bands you can think of. Yeah. We invented the emos, okay? And we did, and yet,
and
there were teen suicides
and that's within the realm of normal human.
But it was never like this. No one ever thought, until Columbine, of course, where they thought, I'm going through this, so I'm going to shoot everybody else.
Right.
We're seeing school systems taking this up, where there's some school systems that are now having anger management and things like that, starting at like grade 2 to start, to because they're trying to find a way to overcome this.
This is an argument for why, even if we grant the right by the conservatives, even if we grant the NRA the idea that guns are good and they're protected constitutionally and so forth, this is an argument for going beyond that. For saying, you know what? It may well be in the Constitution, but it's time to change it. I mean, this is an argument for saying, look at the practical considerations here, and and we've had enough.
Well, and if they're gonna bring up the argument, well, it's obviously mental health, it's obviously this person wasn't wrong in the head, then hold them up to what are you doing about that? Because that was another conversation I had with a friend whose husband is a psychiatrist, and it's laughable the availability of mental health for people who, mental health help.
They don't have any.
It's like, even if you have the money and can afford it.
It's not covered by health insurance.
Even if you're lucky enough to have the insurance or something, you can't even get a spot in therapy. There's not enough, access.
Also, we have mental health treatment covered, but a lot of places don't take insurance because they're worried about not getting paid. So we have a therapist that one of our kids sees and not covered by insurance at all. We have to pay out of pocket for that. So when we do that, we make a claim ourselves to our insurance so that we could get the deductible. But it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And the only way that it works is if it's free through the school for someone to go talk to. And even then, if a kid goes and talks to somebody who's being bullied, the bully will often tease them that they had to go to therapy.
I have a question. So I'm totally on board with all you guys. Let's say there's some fictional fantasy world, right, where we somehow change the Constitution so that the Second Amendment is not ambiguous at all in terms of it being just for militia. So let's say that happens, boom, we change the Constitution. It's done overnight. There's still 300 million guns in our country. I mean, there would have to be some huge initiative, some big thing to, the government would have to buy back guns or something like that. Or they'd have to. I know the Australian model.
Other places have done it, and places in the United States have done it.
Yeah.
The gun buyback. But it's not just the legal side. It's also the social approach. It's taking a stand that says to people, this is not a solution.
Right.
This is not the answer. This is not acceptable. And the problem is that it kind of feeds on itself. One guy does it, and then you get the copycat, and then you get
and it's actually there's some psychological research that says it's a slow moving riot. It's everyone. Let's say you have a crowd of 100 people. One person throws a brick through glass. The second person will look at that first person and be like, you know what, I'm going to do the same. And then all of a sudden, number 3, and then number 4, and number 5. So this is like a slow-moving riot.
It's a rolling development.
And at least for us, it almost kind of began with Columbine. With Columbine being like the I mean, of course, these shootings have been going on forever, but at least in the minds of a lot of people who are doing this right now at this time, Columbine for them was the model of
I
what to
don't
do.
remember the kids' names anymore from Columbine for a long time.
Because I went to elementary school with one of them.
Yeah.
So, but you know what I'm saying?
That's
But
really
I'm
close
saying,
to home.
Yeah, it
but
does.
I didn't.
Yeah.
But I didn't.
Yeah.
But I remember I knew their names for probably 10 years afterwards. You know.
Yeah.
I'm just saying,
I know
and
the
that's
point you're
part
making.
of it. That's
Well,
part of it. These
and-
kids
and-
want to go out in glory.
They want to go out in glory, and you know
know,
what? They
and they
have
want
online
people to know their
followings.
names.
They have like these
Yeah, that's added a new
message
dimension,
groups
too.
that's had a new dimension.
Like the dude in the Orlando Pulse Club shooting who was like streaming it.
Yeah, like streaming it or
And here's an idea. We were talking
He wasn't
before.
streaming it, he was posting about it.
We were talking before the session about social media. Here is some place where social media can step in and say, we're going to shut this down. And they could easily shut it down. But they refuse to do that under some sort of I don't know what. But it's certainly not nobility. It's certainly not the sense of noblesse oblige to the community, okay? Because there are some things that, even with the whole argument about speech and so forth, there are some things which social media has made easier. And this is one of them. Mm-hmm. The idea that you can connect with these completely radical, unsocial type people, and you can get your manifesto published, and you can get reinforced in your ideas. And this is something that social media should just shut down on its own.
Well, they do. It is kind of a moving target because they've tried stuff and like. Do you know more about this, Eric? About like 8chan? Because there's like 4chan, which is a terrible place.
There's
and
2chan, 4chan.
Yeah, it's an online message
8chan,
board, and there's like all this.
There's a lot of
somebody's
extremists.
running
stuff
that.
comes out of it.
Yeah.
But they even like 4chan, which is the one that's like pretty despicable and looked down upon, shut down certain things, and then people popped up somewhere else and called it 8chan, and they're doing like really bad like child pornography and like. So it's like if you shut down one thing, it's like the cockroaches just run somewhere else.
Sure,
Yeah.
Kind of
sure.
thing.
Well, but what it is that when we're thinking of publishing and media and stuff like that, we're not thinking like the programmers. The programmers like, how can I disrupt an industry, and then how can I make it as easy to use as possible? A lot of these social media things that we're using are not set up to have regulation to be watched all the time. You've got thousands and thousands of people watching all the time, writing something and posting things all the time. So what happens is that you have a very small group of people who are watching it and trying to stop what they need to stop. That's how, you have crazy YouTube people who have millions of followers. This one guy, I'm not going to give his name out.
I was going to say his name.
Yeah, but this
You're
one
talking
guy, goes to a forest in Japan where people commit suicide and was live streaming while people were
he's so
hanging
horrible.
from trees. I mean, and everyone's like, well, why didn't YouTube stop him? It's because it's the ease of use, and
Because
that's
it's
who
instant. That's
well,
why.
yeah,
Well, and
but
it can
that's
be
how the
up there,
programs,
like the Christchurch shooting. It was up there, and as soon as somebody was alerted to take it down, it had already been copied by someone, posted somewhere else. So it's like you can catch it early and you can stop the spread, but you can't stop the spread.
You can't.
You
I understand that because it's a vehicle. I mean, it is a different vehicle for communication. The interesting thing is that it makes everything available to any audience that wants to find it.
Yeah.
And so the rules have to change because, I mean, we've talked about this on this podcast before, that the rules for society and for the laws have not kept up with the technology.
That is true. Although it's a tough balance, though, because we want private companies to be accountable, right? If something is posted by somebody on Facebook or Twitter or something, it's going to spread, right? It's going to happen. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, honestly, the only model that I know of where we don't want to go to, where it's a very heavily regulated internet, would be something like China.
Yeah.
Where China,
They had to ban the apps that were too hard to control and put out their own versions.
Put on their own versions of it that they could control for the very fine-tooth comb. And when something spreads, they just somehow have a kill switch to be like, nope, nothing.
Yeah.
Well,
and
but-
so
we don't want to go there either.
We don't want to go there.
No.
I agree. But
it's
that,
hard.
we have to be able to be wise, in our use of the technology that we do have, because how else do we combat this part of it. And I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that things are so different now than they were 50 years ago.
Well, I can tell you what the answer is not, because coming from a social science background, the first thing I see is this is a sociological issue, which means that it's complex and that it's dynamic, and that there are 8 million different factors.
Yeah.
And that it's like an interaction of rotating, ecosystem kind of things. And it's, maybe there's a mental health component. Although I do have to add the caveat that people with mental health issues are much more likely to become victims of violence than to perpetrate violence. So that's something that, I always have to say, that it's not because you have schizophrenia you're going to go shoot people. That's the opposite of how it works.
Yeah.
So there might be a mental health component. There might be maybe it's technology. Maybe it's...
You might have
guns,
availability.
Maybe it's the availability of guns.
So,
maybe a lot of stuff is correlated with poverty. A lot of stuff is correlated with socioeconomic inequality, on both sides.
lack of morality.
Yeah, and people not being in integrated communities, things like that.
The whole bowling
like
alone
the
type
dude
thing.
who shot up the synagogue the other week. Mm-hmm. He was in this really conservative evangelical group, and they had anyway. So it's all this just like these swirling, interacting things, and that's kind of the crux of all these kind of problems is that we can study it and we can get more and more insight, but there's not an answer.
There's not an answer,
anywhere.
And there may not be a solution. Mm-hmm. That there may be various things that you can do that might change certain things. But I think maybe what we're getting to is that we're not going to solve it. There's no silver bullet. Mm-hmm. Pardon the pun. Mm-hmm. There's no silver bullet for this. That'll solve this. Mm-hmm. There's no. And in fact, there may not be a solution to a lot of the problems that we talk about on this podcast. Yeah. The solution is you run your life the best way you know how, in accordance with a set of values that we have given to us by our, through our religious beliefs, and understand that there cannot be a solution that prevents us from living the world and seeing the world.
How many times have we been told that by the leaders of the church? How many times have we heard that in General Conference? Saying, and I know that a lot of people will be like, oh, it's trite to say, motherhood or like teaching your children this thing. But it's true,
There's a lot of triteness and things. But
I know, but I'm just saying a lot of people will say, especially activists, and I know we've all worked with them, they're less like, oh, well, you're using a metal straw today, but you had a hamburger, so you're not making a big difference, But it does make a difference when you teach your kids kindness, when you teach them that that's not okay. We might not be able to change this big, huge problem in the United States, but we could at least change people around us.
Well,
I think that's what this whole podcast is about.
Yeah. Well, and even beyond, I don't know if this is an answer that helps, but is there a value in being as objective and analytical and not prejudicial about issues as it's human nature to be? Because a lot of times I think the factioning and the being stuck and not budging comes from, well, I see it this way and I grew up this way and that's the only way that it must be. It takes somebody to open your eyes to that and say, well, if you actually look at the issues and from the data we have, we understand that this factor is actually more important than that one. And when it's done in an amenable way, if it's somebody or it's a friend or you listen to someone else's life experience, I think a lot of times people are able to kind of shift or at least take a more nuanced stance towards things.
We have to have more than one crystal ball in the air at a time. And I'll give you an example. Joe Biden's in the race for the presidency, and Joe Biden went to California to a company that he gets money from for his political things. You can't run a presidential campaign without money from companies, okay? That's the reality we live in. We wish it weren't so, but that's the reality we live in. So this particular company, there was a union that was picketing. Joe went into the company, and so they said, oh, now he's a scab. First of all, he's not a scab because he
doesn't work there.
He doesn't work there.
That's why you can't be a scab.
And second of all, he may very well be in sympathy with these particular union people, but he's there to do a different thing. And there are a lot of people that were really upset about this, and they're talking about, Joe is just a
corporate shell kind
the
of thing.
corporate shill kind of a guy. Really seriously, you're gonna put Joe Biden and Trump together and see them in the same way?
Yeah, because...
No, you're not.
Well, I'm just saying, I'm not, you're not, but I think...
But if people are coming from that angle where they're so upset with the way things are, they're going to be equally upset with...
The reality is that it will make a difference if we have Joe Biden in the presidency rather than Donald Trump. That's if the Democrats are going to spend their time destroying each other, I'm not going to vote because my candidate wasn't a selected one. You're going to end up with Trump. That's what happened last time. That's what's going to happen this time again. So the idea that you have to have more than one thing, you need to look at 2 or 3 things and say, okay, this is important to me, but I can see where this might be as important to me right now. And then this other thing can come later.
Yeah. And I think that's hard for people to do.
It's a difficult thing for people to do.
I think it's naturally hard for them to do.
But I think it's what people need to do.
But that's why, like, the Trump-style rhetoric that's out there is so hard to fight because people aren't listening to it the way they listen to it. It's not like a critical eye reading
There's no analysis.
Yeah, and being like, well, there's this issue and he gives credence to this, and that's what good journalism is supposed to do. But it's become we're not even going to play that game. We're just going to say stuff.
I despair of the media nowadays. I think the media, sometimes I agree with Trump. The media is just a waste.
So I'm going to throw
it
in
depends.
a subject.
I would say it
the
depends.
TV media, the TV news.
Yeah, well, it's
really
the
different.
monster that wants to be fed all the time. Mm-hmm. So you have a story that happens yesterday, and then it goes away. It goes away after a day. But I'm going to throw something in. Oh, I'm taking Chris's place. But no,
good.
I'm going to throw something in. So in that sense, how do you feel about the Salt Lake Tribune going nonprofit?
I have no idea what that means. Going nonprofit. I know legally what it means, that they're going to be they're going to be a 501c3. They're not going to, everybody's going to still get a salary. How does it change what they do? Are they allowed to take advertising money?
They're just trying to stay alive, though, aren't they?
Yeah, but I don't understand how it changes.
They've already said it's changing the way that they're going to be reporting. I mean, they've done all these sensational things lately, trying to get readership.
Oh, that won't change. I mean, look, I take the Tribune, but I still see it as being anti-BYU, anti.
Yeah, but it's also balancing out Deseret News, which is like
it's a little.
Nothing bad ever happens here.
I'm surprised about how Deseret News. I know that Deseret News was like the quote-unquote church-owned paper.
Yeah, it is.
But the thing is, I never really realized how friendly they worked until I read the article that was in response to the Vice News article that came out, and I was like, "Wow, guys! Like you are really
the one thing they
really
did in that
trying
article,
to."
They said the Vice News, which
many times misnamed the church.
Used the wrong name of the church many times. And I'm like, that's so minor compared to the
issues they're bringing about.
I don't know if we even want to go there.
Which, we don't want to go there. I mean, suffice to say, Vice News was definitely very bent on making the church look bad.
It's Vice. I mean, that's the source you're
But at the same time, I feel like they brought up some good, valid points of concern.
Right.
But the thing is, it would have been appropriate for Deseret News to bring up the points of concern.
Yeah, so in this case, do the Trib and the News balance each other out enough to be, is it worth the hyperbole on both sides?
Like I said, I take the Tribune, but at the same time, I get tired of, because they really are responding to what they believe to be, the dog whistle for their, for their readership. Oh, there's a scandal at BYU. We'll put that, front page. But
what was the podcast recently that talked about the importance of local news? It was really good.
It was.
Have you guys heard that? Was it?
It was.
Was it Hidden Brain? Was it Radiolab? I don't remember.
I think it was.
It's something NPR.
Something
NPR.
It was one of the ones that me and Eric listened to, and then we start having the conversation and realized we both listened to the same thing.
Hilarious.
But the point was that public officials and local government and stuff being held accountable is really dependent on a vibrant local newspaper. And that we're losing that. Yeah. We're losing that, a lot of stuff is going under the radar because people just kind of tend towards, if they can get away with stuff.
I think I want to subscribe to the Tribune.
Just
now.
to be
Well,
just.
I'm going to say though, the Tribune, I will say,
Well, we
yes,
don't subscribe to anything. We're
I
just
will
like,
defend
I have the New York
I will
Times.
Oh, that's
defend the
true.
Tribune in a sense that they are on the pulse of the environmental issues in the Western states.
yes,
I
which
really
matters.
like
They do a
that
very
they
good job.
do. They
Which
do a very
matters.
good job
Yes,
with that.
yes.
You know, keeping
Well, and some
BLM
of
in
the-
check.
Yeah.
Saying, you know, watching the water issues that we have here
also,
in the
I
West.
would add, they're pointing out the issues involving the Honor Code Office and everything around that, and making Title IX a big emphasis now. Really brought a lot of stuff in motion, like the Honor Code Office,
That
Instagram
stuff
account,
that needed to be changed.
that needed to be
Yeah,
changed,
yeah.
that needed to be.
Yeah, so
and
they
say
were going
they're
too far.
I'm
Yeah.
going
But
to say
then-
though that the Trib was also bolstered by social media. Once that
Right,
happened, social media kicked in, and everyone's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I can tell my story now."
Mhm.
So that's
Yeah.
how I see everything kind of fitting together with that media that we were talking about earlier.
Hey,
before the podcast.
Social media.
So-
Let's make a connection here.
Oh,
to the New York Times op-ed from what was the guy's name? The co-founder of Facebook.
the co-founder of Facebook. Let me pull it up.
It
to
was
give us a little
Mark Zuckerberg's friend.
Yeah.
He
Former
was the
friend?
one in
The
the,
guy-
movie that
the guy
In the
His
one
name-
movie, The Social.
The guy whose name we will never remember because he was not Mark Zuckerberg. But basically, he was making
Chris
the
Hughes.
case. Chris Hughes making the case that Facebook needs to be broken up in an antitrust kind of way.
Yeah.
And we brought that up before the podcast, and it got a nice, lively discussion sparked. So
Yeah,
That's why I'm here.
the good people,
Eric
who
heard
listen
us
to
talking
us,
about it and wandered into the room, so that's why he's on the podcast.
the good people who listen to us have no idea that what they hear is just a smidgen of a conversation that started.
They should
and that-
maybe be grateful because
I'm just gonna say
it would never end.
we're probably gonna do this at the end, but we are having our final barbecue.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to come and be part of our conversation,
and do the same
Come.
thing. Details to follow, but it's
detail
going to be
to follow.
yeah, it's
Make
gonna
sure
be
you bring a bottle. Well, we'll have water because
Bring a bottle of water.
I'm gonna say because you're gonna need it because if you're talking, so okay.
But yeah, so the case. Okay, here's the case. Let's simplify it beyond all belief, just to have a place to start. But is Facebook the same kind of public business interest as something like? Let's look at like not the AT&T. What was it called before the
Standard
Bell?
Oil.
The oil or the Bell, like the telephone companies when they were broken up.
Yeah,
Standard Oil. These kind of big things that the government actually actively steps in and says, okay, we're going to put on check on capitalism here because
actually, here's the thing.
ruining
It's not a check on capitalism.
Okay.
It's actually pro-capitalism because when you have a
Because
monopoly
monopoly
destroys
Yeah.
innovation,
Yeah.
destroys competition. When you actually
That's right.
break up these super large companies, they compete with each other. There's more entrance into the market, and there's actually more activity, more benefits to the consumers, and lower prices.
So would this be good in the case of Facebook?
In the case of Facebook, I think... what was the name again?
Let's add Amazon to this. We're gonna add Amazon.
Amazon.
into it
Well, this
as
is
well,
same for
because-
Facebook, Amazon, Google.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
And the fact
big
that
monopolies.
Disney owns all the stinking superheroes now. We were watching this commercial for Disney World, and they had Guardians of the Galaxy, and I'm like,
and
there's too
Star
many
Wars
characters.
and
They
X-Men
have
now.
Too many
And
characters
Ghibli.
at
They have
Disneyland.
Studio Ghibli
I know.
too.
Well, they don't own Ghibli. They work with
They
Ghibli. They
work
don't
with
own
them.
them.
Oh my
Anyway.
gosh. They
So-
own
so-
the rights. to
Yeah,
them
they
in
own the
United
So,
States.
so let me give you the old man.
Alan's, yeah.
The old man's view here. I get on Facebook and I can hear from my cousin in France because he posts things and then I post things and I respond. It's a social thing. I don't pay attention to the ads on Facebook.
You think you don't pay attention
I
to
don't
the
pay
ads.
attention
Do
to
you?
the ads on Facebook.
Ads can be sneaky.
Huh?
Ads can be sneaky.
They can be sneaky, but I'm using it to reach out to friends and neighbors and family members far away. That's what I do with Facebook. And I do subscribe on my Facebook page. I'm part of, I want the New York Times. I want, the Atlantic. I want certain things that I can get, but I suppose I could go elsewhere to get those things. But
You could get the actual newspaper like a freaking caveman.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm also going to say though, I know where you're going here. I know where you're going. But you also post a lot of things about paintings and about
I
places
do.
you've been. And
There's mostly paintings.
well, but paintings you like, places you've been, places you've eaten, events you've gone to, all that information is saved by Facebook and sold to other people.
Okay, but I'm okay with that.
But you're okay with that. But
Because
a lot of people aren't okay with
well,
that.
then stay off the darn thing.
How?
No. What do you mean? There's a button at the bottom of your device.
No, I'm saying...
There's a button, and if you push this button on your device, then you're off of it.
Yes. Okay, so if I'm off of Facebook because our Relief Society, oh yes, I'm going here. Our Relief Society has been told that they should contact us more electronically through email, social media,
Or text.
And if you're not on Facebook, people don't know.
Guys, look, the problem is that data is the new oil, okay? We're not going to go into all the history, but we do know that at one point there was a huge big company, turn of the century, right, called Standard Oil, which controlled everything front to back. Oil production, the railroads, the shipping to oil. I mean, they were the juggernaut, right, of American industry.
Excellent vocabulary word there. Sorry.
What? Okay, anyways.
No, it was a good word.
So what happened was the United States government and through laws came in and said, you know what? This entity is too powerful. It's stifling innovation. It's blocking competitors. It's buying out people.
Because there's no way you could. Is it because there's no way you could possibly compete with it because they had all the other challenges?
Yes, and it's also the upfront costs of building the network that they had would have been too much. You couldn't jump into it.
So AT&T, to me the example is AT&T, Ma Bell, the old Ma Bell, that was so big that nobody else could jump into the telephone. And the way they did it was they controlled the lines, they controlled everything, and there was nobody else who could access the network. And as soon as they got broken up, then you started having other companies provide phone service, and that led to competition, and that led to innovation, and now we have
what
phones
we're
we carry
with
in our
Facebook
pockets.
is it's it's a new technology that didn't exist before, right? And it was seen as this is a social thing, it's a fun, it's a leisure time thing.
Well, that's
right?
the way I use it.
But they went and they bought the railroad lines and stuff like that. They bought
WhatsApp,
Instagram, WhatsApp.
They tried to buy Snapchat.
Yeah.
They also have such a large install user base that another up and coming social media network. Say there's one that values privacy, right? But you pay to get in.
Well, that's like Google Plus tried to do.
Google tried to do it, and they couldn't do it. And Google's ginormous.
Yeah.
Google is another monopoly in a different sector, which is search, right? Facebook's monopoly and their power is so big that there's no one that can come in and be like, you know what? I'm going to provide a better service and faster or more secure than Facebook is. No one can do that because no one has the upstart capital or the time to be able to catch up to 3 billion users. And so people are stuck.
He's got the money.
Yeah,
He's got money.
But
Bezos.
Amazon is your Walmart, your Netflix.
Yeah, they're a different antitrust issue
they're
altogether.
They're
So
trying to get into healthcare now. That's a big...
Yeah.
But now they can take us to the moon, and that's an important piece of...
Yeah, that's another thing.
Yeah, they can take one rich guy to the moon. I don't know if they can do anything.
Well, that's SpaceX. That's doing that.
So the question...
Elon is doing that.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that data is a new standard, is a new oil. And
it's a resource. Yeah, it's a resource.
Okay, and I get that, okay? But the infrastructure is so different.
Of course.
It is not lines.
You don't have to physically
on the
transport
grid
it somewhere.
Right.
But the infrastructure this time is the networks of people that come together. It's the numbers. It's families.
With the data, it's knowing it's having the permission to use the data related to it, or having permission to.
And it's Facebook being able to say, "Hey, you advertising company, I bet you would love to reach everyone between the ages of 30 and 35 that likes video games, that also likes Japan." That I'm talking about myself,
okay,
right? And then and here's the specific stuff. Advertisers,
but why does that
want
bother
that?
us?
Well, I see where you're
why
coming
does that
from.
bother us?
Here in America, that's how Facebook is. But when Facebook expanded, this is where his old partner comes into play. When Facebook expanded to other countries, they did it too quickly. We have Aniki here who understands how language works. Facebook would do that, in each new country they would try to do a word for word translation from English to things. They didn't understand local cultures. They didn't do that. So then you get the Arab Spring, which was Facebook did that. And you get all these other things, but Facebook didn't understand its power. And that's where that's where it becomes, does it have too much power to influence social change?
Let me respond to what Alan was asking, right? It's fine, right? If Facebook wants to sell to t-shirt manufacturers to sell me t-shirts, okay, I get that. They're a business. They have to stay, they have to make money somehow.
Well,
but here's the problem.
The famous question is, how do you make money on
here's
Facebook,
the problem.
right? You remember the senator.
That same data will be available to, say, a super PAC or a lobbyist group or, say, the NRA, and they'll be able to razor sharp, thin, or hey, how about maybe some Russians?
It already happened,
It already happened, yeah.
Cambridge
how about some
Analytica.
Russians who, want to tip the scales a little bit in our election? They can use their internet service or internet research agency, quote unquote, to then, tip the scales here. Hey, here's $50, Facebook, for maybe saying a couple things about Bernie Sanders here. Or how about...
Well, and here's the thing.
Yeah.
When it's a business and, a business has a lot of clout, and you respect that business. Like, right now, Google is kind of a benevolent overlord, as far as I know, right? Like, they're kind of...
Their motto used to be, don't be evil, but they took that out.
Oh, they took it out?
They took it out,
Oh,
yeah.
man. Well, like, and so for the time being, I trust Google, and they have way more of my data than they probably should. But a business isn't held accountable the same way that a democratic government is. And so, and with Facebook, there's one dude calling a lot of the shots. And Mark Zuckerberg is a smart guy, right? But he can put out an edict, I want Facebook to do this, and they'll do it, and the fact that Mr. Doofus American kid just influenced a bunch of revolutions in the Middle East, that's kind of, that's a disproportionate amount of power, I think, is the argument for that.
So,
and that's what the op-ed was saying, was that he is one person has too much power over his, and even really smart people, there's not one person who's that smart.
No,
even Stephen Hawking was really smart, but outside of his field, I don't want him to call the shots.
Well,
on
and that's why
and
that's why when we have government, especially here in the United States, the president's president, but he has a cabinet, and those people are experts in their own little field.
Well,
they're supposed to.
Objection, Your Honor. Assumes facts, not in evidence.
Well, I'm saying that
unless they all quit and he doesn't fill their positions, and
the model is supposed to be that the people who are the heads, the cabinet heads, are supposed to be experts in their fields to be able to tell the president the information they need. We don't have that right now.
Yeah.
We don't have that right now.
Nope.
And part of that is because, the consolidation of power, he does not, our current president doesn't want anybody telling him no, especially when he is so warlike and allowing all these people to tell him how the military should be.
Well, and he thinks he gets an opinion on everything. Did you see his tweet about the Kentucky Derby? He had an opinion on the Kentucky Derby.
So did I.
I'm like,
but I watched the race at least.
I'm like, dude, you're not an expert at horse racing. You weren't there.
I, for one, as the PC police, feel like that equine American was totally robbed of his title.
Oh my stars! Oh my God!
And the progressives in this country
who wanted the second place horse.
planted that person to spook.
So that's just the one person having an expert opinion on things that they don't know anything about, which Trump exemplifies, which Zuckerberg exemplifies. But I like to the point you brought up about being warlike. It reminds me of something that Alan was talking about before, and the way you put it is that we are. How did you phrase it? I was trying to remember.
I don't win.
We are war makers before the.
We are war makers.
We're warmongers. I mean, if we're warmongers. We look. There's money to be made out there. Okay, killing people is good for business, and the more wars we have, the more the military-industrial complex.
Oh man, George Orwell knew this in 1940, whatever.
And so
Eisenhower talked about it.
Eisenhower is the one who created that phrase, the term, and look, we now have a situation. I'm glad that you guys have gone to the cabinet, because what we've got is recently we have Bolton, who is now basically in charge of a bunch of our foreign policy, national security. And he wants to get into war with Iran. He has said many times he wants to force regime change in Iran, because every time we've tried to do regime change in large countries, it's always
worked
done
really
so
well.
well.
Oh,
or even some small countries. But so now we've got carrier groups steaming towards Iran, and we keep. It's interesting because we've got two allies in this thing. We've got Israel, which Israel and Iran are, and then we've got Saudi Arabia, and again, two self-serving nations that keep saying to us, "Hey, go ahead and start a war with these guys because they're bad guys."
Yeah.
And Bolton was so aggressive, so militaristic when he was serving George W. Bush. George W. Bush fired him. Okay, so that tells you how bad it was.
Yeah.
But
previously fired by a Republican president, but now
and now Bolton basically is playing the hand. We also have restarted the view that Central and South America belongs to the United States, and that nobody else need interfere, but that we can go in and do whatever we want whenever we want to. Mm-hmm. It's obnoxious. We're now talking about involving troops going into Venezuela.
It is very short-sighted, because we know when it happens, especially in the Middle East, we are creating the terrorists. So it's almost, to me, watching this almost feels like rather they're not paying attention to what's happened before, or they're purposefully suggesting these things so we can breed more terrorists.
Yes.
So that we can continue this
because then we're
cycle of
always,
war.
Well, and then we're always afraid, right? When there's a terrorist threat, there's always someone to be afraid of, and there's always someone to be. Don't worry, guys.
You've got an election coming up, and it's not a good thing to do to change horse in the middle. Change horses in the middle of the war. So maybe you've got those. You've got. We're still in Afghanistan, for crying out loud. Mm-hmm. This past week, about a week ago, I met with a fellow who's a military lawyer, but he went as a civilian. He's also a civilian lawyer. And as a civilian, he went to Afghanistan for a year. And he was legal advisor to the Secretary of Defense for the Afghanistan government, for the Homeland Security Secretary for Afghanistan, as well as for the Judge Advocate General for the Afghanistani Army and some other high ranking. He was their legal advisor on behalf of the United States State Department, the Department of Defense. He had done the same job. He had done a stint 5 years before. So we've been in Afghanistan since 9/11. It was the right response at that time. We needed to go in, get rid of the Taliban, which was in power, and then we should have gotten out. Instead, we decided...
There are kids who can vote who were born after the war in Afghanistan started. Like, think about that.
Think about that. The longest war in our history by far. He made an interesting point. He said, we thought that in the last 5 years, so if you remember, you had, Barack Obama had kind of put some forces in there, and he thought, okay, this is going to be good because we actually saw a decrease in some of the corruption or some of the terrorism, and he thought, maybe we're going to be able to get out of there. His assessment of 5 years ago and of 5 years before and of this latest one is that things have gotten worse, not better. What are we still doing there if things are getting worse instead of better? We're never going to create the 51st state, in Afghanistan. Right. We're never going to create a Western democracy in Afghanistan. Yet we're still in Afghanistan. We still have.
Well, and we haven't taken care of the people that we said we would. We had translators and people helping us.
We never do that.
But we promised them.
Afghanistan is where empires go to die. Mm-hmm. The Roman Empire, the British Empire, the Soviet Union, and now America. Okay.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. The American people don't realize that we're an empire, but we are, and we're just in this. We're in this perpetual expansion. Well, and we see what has happened.
Except that this is the fall. This is the fall of the American Empire. Trump is, if you think of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, Trump is causing the fall of the American Empire. The rise of the American Empire was World War II to basically the end of the Obama era. Okay? Where we created the international community, where we created all of these international organizations, which, although they are not 100% effective, although they all agree with us, were a vehicle for us to create our influence, exert our influence in the world, to create peace and to create an international structure which benefited us. That's why we created it. Okay?
I think there's an argument to be made that that empire maybe didn't need to stay alive. That maybe it's not our business to go around and impose our,
No.
But the empire
but the thing is,
the empire also had soft power too, a power that allowed the church to be able to proselytize in as many countries as possible on peace missions. I mean, that power.
It is a soft power. I mean,
that we've lost.
If you think about it, plus we know things. We know that. Here's what we know. Friendly democracies don't go to wars with friendly democracies and buy stuff from each other. And it was a way to...
And in that sense, it's good. I just don't like the empire... I know there is... imperialist things about it. I don't think imperialism is good in general.
Right.
I think,
right.
As we've seen from...
And I don't think it was...
And I don't think the empire they're talking about is a soft power.
Yeah.
I
think there is an argument to be made on whether
it's the American... Look.
A lot of
we were pretty hard in a lot of places.
I know, but that was before the time that Alan here is talking about.
Right.
We're talking about the Philippines. We're talking about Guam.
We did send troops to lots of places.
Yes, that did
But
happen.
at the same time... There was that cultural thing, that cultural norm. Everybody in the world wears jeans and eats hamburgers. We won the cultural war.
But was that
but think about it though.
That didn't need to happen for the world.
In the 90s,
it did not need to happen.
When Kosovo happened, they had the pictures. I remember actually this happening. They had all the footage of it on CNN and everything. And I remember thinking, wow, they look so American. They had the leather jackets of the time. They had the jeans. People had Pepsi t-shirts. And I was just like, why aren't we helping them even more? I mean, they look just like us. They bought our stuff. People were speaking English on the news.
Yeah.
I mean, but we have pushed that away. This administration, I agree with you, has pushed that to the side.
Yeah, but...
Trump is not just the end of the American empire. He's killing the country.
He's killing the country.
I'm more concerned about what he's doing domestically, too.
Domestically, he really is.
Oh, I agree.
My point about the warmongering is we're rolling in with this guy, and Congress is doing nothing to stop it at this point. I mean, ultimately, Congress has the ultimate power, and it's the power of the purse, okay? It took years and years and years for Congress to exercise that in the Vietnam context. It took years and years and years for Congress to say, you know what? You can't do that if we don't pay for it. And we're not paying for it. Iran-Contra was exactly another example of the Congress finally saying, enough. We're not going to help you fund these revolutionary groups in South America, Central America, which, by the way, are destabilizing whole countries. Ultimately, that is the one power Congress has. Thank goodness that at least there's one house that isn't owned totally by the Trump supporters. But as a nation, we are doing nothing other than exporting violence and war. And we're about to get another generation of young people who are going to become casualties of a warmongering doctrine.
Well, yeah, and the sad thing is the things that actually help, the things that decrease terrorism are, they were doing studies on how immigrants assimilate in the U.S. versus Europe, and the U.S. was doing a lot better. Kids, when we have a generous, refugee program, when we have a generous, a vibrant immigrant program, things like that, that's how you decrease radicalization. And, kids who move here from Syria in one generation, they're American kids.
That's right.
Yes. But
in Germany,
either
even
intentionally or accidentally, and I'm afraid it's intentionally, put out the wrong message that, we got to stop this, we have to build walls, we have to, not accept anybody, and that is feeding the fire of radicalization more than anything else can.
That's exactly right.
And making our problems worse. But that's why I have to wonder, is this an Orwellian thing where we're like, being at war is good for us in power, and it's good for certain people making money?
I think it is.
It's bankrupting the country as a whole, but it's...
Yeah, exactly.
So even just on personal fronts, like within our families, you see that where people have decided to go, to their own corners. They don't want to talk to each other. You can't talk about anything. I was just talking about that. One of my friends posted a Game of Thrones meme. Yes, more pop culture, but a Game of Thrones meme about he who wants to be king shouldn't be king. And then you have all these people, I want to be king. And then Jon Snow saying, I don't want to be king. Right. And so I rebutted that with a meme of, he who wants to be king shouldn't be king, and Trump saying, I'm the president, whatever. And I was asked to take that down by my friend. But yet today he was putting up things about the abortion laws, which I don't know if we don't have time to talk about that today, but about those, and they were vile. It was just vile. And he didn't take them down. He didn't ask anyone to take them down. And I'm just like, we're common sense, like common decency is gone. And this is a person who's close to me. Like, I would do anything for this person. And so I think that, part of what we're talking about here is, we talked about social media and how that, isolates us, and we talk about these things. I think that's what it really is, you have these people who are violent and they're warmongers, and they're talking in their own echo chambers. They're not seeing, and they don't want to see the data. They don't want to see those things. And then you have, other people we've talked about anti-vaxxers in the past. You have all these groups who are saying, you can't tell me. So what if you have all those letters before your name? You don't need to. You don't have it. And that's where, like, I'm the podcast producer. I'm not usually in front of the mic. But that's where everything we've talked about in the last 4 years correlates with the gospel. This is why we've done this, is to say, okay, all these things are happening. And as people who believe in it, we are seeing the same patterns that we have been taught, where someone comes in, he divides us, or the person divides us, and everybody starts just ramping up the rhetoric until there's people who start to die. And then as you see, civilizations fall. We know this. It's the Book of Mormon pattern. We know this.
And the interesting thing is how quickly it can happen. Now, one of the criticism of the Book of Mormon early on by certain thinkers is that, well, it describes rises and falls so quick that we can't really believe that it would happen. And yet, in 2 years, this country has lost so much. And so, yes, I think it can fall. Cultures, civilizations can fall very quickly. And we started out 4 years ago talking about public policy, and we started talking about how our religion can inform public policy or our views of public policy. And in those 4 years, we have had, I think we've seen a radicalization, not just in the church, obviously out of the church as well. How do we continue to talk about these things? And frankly, one of the reasons why I'm, thinking it's time to end the podcast is because basically the message becomes the same. Just live your religion, be true to what you understand it to be, and be careful that you don't replace your faith with an ideology.
Yeah. And I think that's what it's done for me, and I'm hoping that's what it does for other people, is give them the courage to stick to the things that they know on principle are true. This is going to be super corny, and it's going to feed into your favorite pop culture stuff, but it's a really simple thing, but I think about it a lot. In the first Harry Potter, when they, Harry and his friends have to go save the school, but their friend Neville turns them into the school authorities, because from what he understood, they were breaking the rules, and in his mind that was what was right, and they specifically praised him for doing what was right even when it involved him going against his friends. And I, that's a really simplistic thing, but I think about that a lot because there are issues that really matter to me, and it's hard. And I have family, I have really close people who really think I'm wrong, and they really try to bring up continually about, you can't think that way, you can't do that, you're being brainwashed. And I'm like, no, I see this as this is like New Testament Christianity. This is these principles that I'm talking about really matter, whether it be the way we treat people, the way we treat the poor, the way, all of these different social issues play into things. But being able to hold on to some piece of, no, I'm going to believe in this because it's right, and because I want to do the right thing, and, have a place to have some faith in that still. And
thank goodness, I'm going to say thank goodness for the church's new curriculum, the home-based curriculum. Of course, we're starting with the New Testament this year, and the last few lessons have been very, very strong testaments to Christ and His kindness. I think that's what we need to do. That's what I got.
Look, and frankly, maybe the message that we can change public policy is wrong. Maybe all we can do is live our faith the way we understand it, and maybe we can influence our friends or maybe our neighbors, some of them, or maybe just ourselves. But maybe,
well, I think it's a cumulative effect, though.
It is,
and it does more than we think. It does, because there's honestly there have been so many times where, you know, I've encountered in my life. I've definitely changed my political views over time. Like, I used to be much more conservative or traditional, I guess you could say, and it was, for me, it was not the times where, you know, somebody argued with me online, or it wasn't the times where somebody said, no, you should do this. It was interacting with people. It was talking to my neighbors. It was listening to my gay roommate BYU story. Like, what's his story? Tell me what are you going through? What is it? What's it like? And it was just in listening to those stories and trying to understand people that those are the quiet moments where people's minds are changed and their hearts change, and their hearts become more empathetic and they become a little bit more Christ-like. And that's what I think what we have to do. And when we say to live your life and do your best and have those day-to-day moments, honestly, those, you know, it might be the kids in your young men's class who are looking up to you and saying, you know, hey, like, I don't know if I really want to do this, but they see you as a role model and they see you doing okay. And maybe you're not like the other older people at church. That's right. But you try your best and you move forward. And I think that's when those connections and, you know, hearts are changed.
Absolutely. No, I agree with that.
And the good things happen.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Next week is our last episode. And so I'm just going to...
Boy, that's going to be a feast.
It's going to be interesting. I was not going to be on this episode today. I was just going to show up for then, but, you know...
Heck, I wasn't even going to be on. I just kind of showed up.
It just happened. But,
Eric's here, yay.
So next week we're just going to read letters and stuff?
Next week is going to be an interesting thing.
Chris will be back.
Chris will be back. Anna Keith's going to be here. Next week, it's going to be a little bit different because we're going to be talking about... We're going to be talking about the podcast.
And we're going to sing Kumbaya.
That's true.
Have a nice little...
about the world outside. We're going to be talking about us.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a little egotistical episode, I guess. But wrapping that up, and I've mentioned it earlier in the episode, we are going to have our farewell barbecue. So we're going to...
So we were last year, too.
Yeah, we were here last year. Yeah, so if you want to come and see us and have a final conversation with us, that's fine. We are still deciding on events. So if you're wondering about sister socials and things like that, we're still deciding on that. I think I'm going to be passing the baton on to some worthy sisters that have helped me over the years. What I would just like to say is that if anybody has any comments or anything, or they want us to know how the podcast affected them, please, please, please send us an email. Of course, that's always at latterdayleft@gmail.com, or get us on Facebook. I know we talked about Facebook today. We are on there. So you can contact us.
It's the only place I am. No, I mean, I have an email account, and I guess I have a Twitter account that I haven't used in 8 years or something.
Yeah. Please send us those letters. Let us know. We always decide our topics right before the show. So if you want us to talk about something, tell us.
And have a good week.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Don't forget that next week is our final episode of this show, and I will be joining Anarchy, Alan, and Chris as we sit down for a retrospective. As always, if you like our show, let us know by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. And our theme music is a selection from Tate Peterson's Midday Blues. You can find his music on freemusicarchive.com.